It's now time for statements by ministries. The Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise in the Legislature today to recognize April 19th as Equal Pay Day in Ontario. And in observance of the day, Speaker, I'm happy to share time on the floor today with my colleague, the Honourable Tracy McCharles, who is a minister responsible for women's issues. Speaker, Equal Pay Day is a day that's calculated each year in countries around the world to mark the extra time it takes a woman to earn as much money as a man. Now, the truth is, Speaker, in Ontario, we provide very high-quality education to both our girls and our boys. Then, we do not let women achieve equal success in the workplace. And we need to change that, Speaker. I want to acknowledge the advocates, the community leaders, those who work each and every day in this province to end gender wage discrimination. Now, since I rose last year, Speaker, we put a lot of work in towards closing the gender wage gap here in the province. I'm pleased to tell the House that today the Ministry of Labour posted online a summary of our public and our stakeholder consultations that took place over last fall and the winter. Our Gender Wage Gap Strategy Steering Committee and the staff that supports it has solicited ideas and views from the public in town hall meetings right across this great province. They've held group and they've held one-to-one meetings with 700 stakeholders and key parties all over this province. The steering committee also has had over 1,400 responses to an online survey, and we've consulted broadly internally within the provincial government. Speaker, all this began in the Premier's mandate letter to me.
Exactly.
The Premier asked that I work with Minister McCharles to lead the development of a wage gap strategy that will close the gap between men and women in the context of a 21st century modern economy. It's an important task. It's one that Minister McCharles and I have been very, very pleased to take on together.
Very seriously.
Statements by ministries. The Minister of Children and Youth Services and is responsible for women's issues.
Thank you, Speaker. The facts are, Speaker, are there, but what are we doing about it? In 2014, the Premier asked my colleague, the Minister of Labour, and myself to lead the development of the wage gap strategy. The steering committee was formed, and they were brought together to consult with diverse groups from across the province and give us the best advice on how to close the wage gap. The committee's recommendations will be presented in a little bit later this year, and I look forward to hearing their advice on the best way to take concrete action to close the gap and help women reach their full potential. Speaker, Ontario's Pay Equity Act has been viewed as one of the most progressive pay equity statutes in the world. Ontario is the first province to recognize Equal Pay Day so that we can acknowledge the vital role of women in the economy. We've been working vigorously to support the advancement of women in the labour market. However, the fact that the wage gap still exists points to the need to do more.
Therefore, it's time for responses. The member from Halbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Social service providers in child care, welfare and development services are predominantly female-dominated jobs. The proxy pay equity obligations are a heavy financial burden and are creating a wage gap between agencies. The government is not leading on this issue, as it has stopped paying these agencies the base funding needed to match obligated increases under pay equity. I give you examples that I'm sure we've all had meetings with community living or Horizons groups in our ridings, and they are amongst those that have an outstanding liability across the field.
We need tangible and concrete steps to move forward to create a more equal society. We know that small business is struggling and can't deal with any more regulations, but we as members of provincial parliament all play a leadership role in our communities. We have a responsibility to stand up and say that gender bias in any form is not acceptable. All women, our mothers, our wives and our daughters deserve equal pay for equal work and shouldn't be asked to accept anything less. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Further response, the member from London West.
Thank you, Speaker. These issues were raised frequently during the government's Closing the Gender Wage Gap consultations, as noted in the summary report posted today. The report observes, some people said that the laws are not well enforced, are complex and difficult to access. Many suggested that the laws should be monitored and implemented in a proactive manner by government, instead of relying on an individual's complaint before an investigation is started. It also states, we heard that there is a need for effective enforcement, proactive monitoring for compliance, support for those making complaints, especially for non-unionized workers, and amendments to the proxy provisions of pay equity. Another theme that was highlighted in the summary report is the recognition of childcare as an essential strategy to eliminate the gap. The report states that childcare was the #1 issue everywhere. It concludes, almost everyone mentioned the need to provide high-quality, affordable, and accessible childcare as a priority issue to help working women and their families close the gender wage gap. Consultation participants strongly supported a public system of early childhood education and care that is universal, high quality, and comprehensive, and for public funding to ensure both adequate wages and affordable fees. Yet the 2016 Ontario budget includes no new money for childcare funding, no new investments to help reduce fees, despite the fact that for the second year in a row, Ontario reported the highest and least affordable childcare fees in Canada, with long waiting lists for subsidies in many communities.
Thank you. Thank all members for their statements.